Last time we talked about the public Bapa-Verse, the stand-up specials that invented a new genre of accidental tragedy, the Austin Storage Unit podcast, the whiskey brand nobody talks about, the truck brand everyone forgot, and the central pattern that holds it all together. The moment someone steps out of Brendan Schaub's orbit, the universe hands them a promotion.
This just in. You don't want to be less. A series on the changing American market.
That was the surface level. Today we go deeper. Because here's what part 1 didn't have time for. The lore. The origin story. The bench press claim that turned into a Reddit forensic investigation. The college roommate story he told on his own podcast like it was charming. And an episode of The Fighter and the Kid from just a few weeks ago in which Schaub, faced with what the show calls, and I am quoting directly, one of the most insane cat stories ever told on the show, responds by asking, and again I am quoting, "How thick is that cat?" This is part 2, across the Bapaverse, and it goes all the way back. Brendan Schaub was born in Aurora, Colorado, to an English mother named Deborah and an American father named Peter Schaub. His father is a second-degree black belt in Taekwondo. Let that sit for a second. His father is a second-degree black belt in Taekwondo, meaning before Brendan ever walked into a gym on his own, he grew up in a household where martial arts was already part of the furniture. The foundation was laid before he asked for it. At Overland High School, he didn't just play sports. He lettered, multiple times, in both football and lacrosse. Now, lacrosse.
But Whittier was a really good academic school, and they were the number one team, especially on the West Coast, but number one overall in the nation for lacrosse. And at the time, it was D3, but D3 lacrosse is really, really high level. So they offered me an academic scholarship, which is hilarious. I had like a 2.7 but they offered me an academic scholarship if I played lacrosse and football. So I went there, played a year. That lacrosse team, that Whittier lacrosse team, is the best, hands down, team I've ever been on across the board.
I want to talk about lacrosse specifically because the Fighter and the Kid subreddit has talked about lacrosse specifically, and they are correct to do so. Lacrosse is not a universal sport. It requires clubs, gear, travel, coaching. In the United States, lacrosse participation maps almost perfectly onto zip codes where people have discretionary income to spend on their kids' athletics. It's not impossible to play lacrosse without money, but it's not the sport that working-class kids in struggling neighborhoods accidentally fall into. Brendan Schaub lettered in lacrosse at Overland. He was named team MVP his senior year. He was a Colorado All-Star, not just football. Lacrosse and football. The fan discourse around this isn't mean. It's just observational. There's a thread on r/The Fighter and the Kid, one of many, many threads, where someone lays it out cleanly, and it's hard to argue with. He played lacrosse. He bounced through multiple sports and careers without ever needing a real job, and he always had family backing to chase his passions. And then the money line. He's not talented. So many talented poor kids never get the parental investment. This guy did, and he still ended up mediocre. That's not an attack, that's a thesis. After high school, Schaub doesn't get a scholarship, but he walks on at Whittier College, a private liberal arts school in California, and makes both the football and the lacrosse team. Then, before his junior year, he transfers to the University of Colorado Boulder to play football full-time. He redshirts his first season. He appears in 26 games over 2 years, mostly on special teams, with no starts. He gets placed on scholarship partway through his senior year. After college, he plays arena football with the Utah Blaze. He lands on the Buffalo Bills practice squad. He doesn't make the final roster.
But like as an athlete, like if you would have told me as a kid in my career, like, all right, played Division I college football, then had a shot with the Buffalo Bills. As a kid, I'm like, oh, that's a success.
And here's where it gets interesting. Instead of getting a job, he starts training in boxing and jiu-jitsu. Within 6 months, he wins a Colorado Golden Gloves novice division title. 6 months later, he's on The Ultimate Fighter. Now, I want to be clear, the athletic ability is real. The dedication is real. None of this was handed to him in the octagon. But the infrastructure that allowed him to pivot from football to MMA to comedy to whiskey to trucks without ever hitting a financial wall, without ever having to take a night shift or a warehouse job to keep the lights on while chasing the next dream. That part is worth noticing. Because Brendan Schaub brands himself as a grinder, a blue-collar hustler who fought his way up from nothing. And in part 1, we talked about the golden tickets he squandered, the Rogan cosign, the Netflix deal, the specials. But in part 2, we're pointing out something he almost never mentions. The golden tickets started way before Rogan. They started at home, in Aurora, with a Taekwondo dad and a lacrosse stick.
I was super fortunate where I was surrounded by guys like you, Callan, Bert, Tom, and it's just like where I wanted to be in that party. I was so fortunate. The stars aligned for me where I was at this party over here and guys were getting CT and, you know, you're fighting and it's a fucking grind. And then you guys were over here. I'm like, well, I want to be one of them. I'm good, man. I'm good. I want to do that. Yeah. And I think it took that bridging that gap. And to be honest, I think that's the only way that you could have done it, because the ego that I had at the time, especially fighting, man, getting to that level, it was like that ego's insane. The narcissist and the dream of, oh, I can beat Kane or Stipe, these guys. And I think the only way that I could have bridged that gap is by you going so hard in the paint.
Let me tell you about the bench press. Brendan Schaub was, by any honest measure, a legitimate athlete. Golden Gloves, novice division champion. Ring of Fire heavyweight title. Brief time with Buffalo Bills, UFC heavyweight. The man's career is not made up. But somewhere along the way, the internet started noticing something. And once they noticed it, they couldn't stop. The claim? Brendan Schaub benches 225 pounds for 40 reps.
Yeah, I want to challenge those guys to 225. That's why I wanted to challenge them.
Hold 225?
Bench press 225.
Oh, as many times as possible?
Because I asked Thor, and he told me his record, and I was like, I beat that a while ago. And he's like, let's do it right now. I'm like, right now? Like, we're in the middle of a photo shoot. I'm like, I ain't doing it right now. And I was like, let's wait to after, but we'll do 225, 315, 225, and see who can do the most, and we'll just combine it.
What's his record of 225?
I think he said like 30-something.
What can you do?
40.
Now, let's do some math on this because the Sherdog community already did it for us. At his NFL Combine, the official documented number, the number recorded under test conditions when it actually mattered, is 21 reps. 21. That's actually solid. That's a real number. That's consistent with what a strong, athletic, 240-pound man who played college football can do. The number he's claiming on a podcast years later is 40. Then, in various retellings, 42. Then, apparently, he also claimed a stronger grip than Thor Bjornsson, the man who holds the world record for the deadlift. And here's what makes this psychologically fascinating, rather than just annoying. Nobody asked him to be stronger than Thor Bjornsson. Nobody needed him to bench 42 when 21 is already genuinely impressive. He has a real athletic resume, a real career, a real body of work. But the Bapa-Verse has a term for this. They call it the redact, the thing where Brendan's stories in every retelling get just a little bit bigger, just a few more reps, just a slightly stronger grip, just a slightly more legendary version of a real thing that actually happened. One commenter in a thread that has become something of a Bapa-Verse landmark put it this way. Dude was legit competing at the highest level, and he still feels the need to lie about dumb stuff. This dude has the emotional maturity of an insecure 11-year-old. That's the key. It's not that he wasn't athletic. It's that he can't stop. And once you see it with the bench press, you see it everywhere. You see it in the way he retells UFC fights he lost. You see it in the way he describes his comedy crowds. You see it in the way the drive to inflate every stat, every story, every version of himself never quite switches off. Brendan Schaub's life is basically 225 for 42. The base story is real, the resume is legitimate, and then somewhere between what happened and what he tells you about it, he adds 20 imaginary reps. Here's a story Brendan Schaub told on his own podcast. On The Fighter and the Kid, episode 137, Schaub launched into what he clearly thought was a funny anecdote about a college roommate, a guy he described as, and this is him, not me, the biggest witch on the team. His word, cleaned up for YouTube. The setup, this roommate, apparently tired of having his food eaten, started labeling it, put his name on his groceries, which is, by any reasonable adult standard, a completely normal and understandable thing to do when you live with someone who eats your food. Brendan's response to this? He ate it anyway. All of it. Then threw out the empty boxes. Then put the empty labeled boxes back in the fridge, with the guy's name still on them. The roommate called his mom. Brendan, by his own account, hung up on the mom mid-sentence. He told this story like it was a highlight reel moment.
I had a roommate who was the biggest on the team. For whatever reason, I had to room with the kid. And me and him did not get along. We played the same position. So he was the guy where, dude, what's mine is yours. I eat like one Triscuit, and then I come home, and he put sticky notes all over his entire food. Literally open the box of Nutri-Grain, put it all in, and I go, what do I do? I eat all of it, and I throw out the rest, and then put it all back. Then I go to practice.
That's funny.
And I come back.
That's so funny.
Right? And I'm ready to throw down, right? I'm like, all right, we're gonna figure it out. My phone's ringing like nonstop. I'm like, what the I go, hello? It's his mom. He called his mom and told his mom what I did. We're in college. We're juniors or sophomores in college. I'm like,
that guy's
this.
all these people.
So I'm like, what the his mom? And I just go, his mom's like, talk to me, like yell at me. I just go, get the super disrespectful, which I never am. I get I hang up the phone. And so at the time, there's only one parking spot for our place.
So his mother said, Brendan, you ate all of his food?
You got to pay it back. You need to apologize. And started tearing into me about my character. I went, hung up the phone.
Now, what makes this particular story so rich is what happens in the follow-up episode. Episode 138. Brian Callen reads an email from a listener who points out, calmly, logically, that the roommate had every right to label his food, that parking his bike in a shared spot wasn't a crime, that calling your mom when you're being treated like garbage by someone twice your size is not, in fact, a sign of weakness. And Brendan's response is a masterpiece of not understanding the point. He says there's no bully here. He says the guy was actually bigger than him. He says fighting it out man to man would have been the correct resolution. And he goes on a multi-minute riff about how not wanting to fight someone who is harassing you makes you, and I'm paraphrasing, a weak person.
Wrote a very eloquent email. Said he was pretty surprised by the story you told last week about the incident you had with your former college roommate. Mm-hmm. It seemed out of character from the Brendan I've come to know over the past few years. I'm older than you by a few years, but I have come to look up to you in a way. You guys have made me reflect on myself and motivated me to take my life a little more seriously than I had been. But then he goes on to say, your roommate, but he says that this is the first time where I thought, whoa, maybe I don't like this guy as much. Your roommate had every right to write his name on his food. He had every right to want to do his shit.
I wish you would have drawn dicks and balls.
Me too. The message you sent by eating and throwing out his food was, I'm going to eat your disrespect you, and there isn't a goddamn thing you can do about it. And then you further disrespected this guy on the most personal level by telling his mother to The parking spot response was a little petty on his part, but then again, if those were the rules, he had every right to park his bike there. And then he goes on to say, your thing would have probably gotten broken into anyway, but what happened was you spit in his face, threw him through a glass door, and this to you is handling the situation as men. And then you criticize him for calling the cops. You mentioned that when you had told your roommates you said that.
Called his mom.
Called his mom.
Big difference.
Yeah. But he did, I guess he did call the cops later, right?
He tried.
Yes. Okay.
The listeners heard a story about a guy being harassed who had no recourse and responded by writing a note. Brendan heard the same story and thought he was the hero of it. What's important here isn't the roommate story in isolation. It's what the roommate story predicts. Because if you go back to part 1, the Mark Harley situation, the George firing, the way he talks about Theo's departure from King and the Sting, the pattern is identical. In every version of every story, there is a person in Brendan's orbit who has reasonable needs, or reasonable complaints, or a reasonable amount of talent that threatens to outshine his, and Brendan's instinct is always the same. Frame them as the problem. Tell the story in a way that makes him the one being wronged. And if anyone points out the other side, suggest that they're mentally weak or emotionally unstable or just don't understand how men handle things, the Bapa-Verse always has a designated victim. And it's never Brendan. The College Roommate was episode 1, pilot season. Mark, Harley, George, Theo, those are the prestige drama. The writing was on the wall, or more accurately, written on an empty box of cereal with someone else's name on it, placed back in the fridge. Okay, I need to talk about the cat. Episode 1187 of The Fighter and the Kid. Cat crime, peptides, and Hollywood's weirdest casting rumors. May 2026. Brendan Schaub, Brian Callen, Nick Simmons. The episode description, the official description, written by the people who make the show, promises, and I quote, one of the most insane cat stories ever told on the show. Not the most insane story, the most insane cat story. That's a genre distinction. That implies there are enough cat stories on this podcast to have a leaderboard.
And then
Cat.
a cat. And then they had to snitch on the guy, and the guy lost custody of his kids. He's on a list. I don't know what kind of list you get.
Cat, bro. So you're a weirdo.
I don't know what kind of list you get put on, but he's on some type of list. I don't know if he's just not allowed at Petco or something like that.
List I don't want to know.
Yeah, I think there's that bestiality
so
thing. You can do
disturbing.
you can do
Right?
like 7 years or something like that for that.
Yeah, he lost custody of his kids.
Damn,
What is that?
friends are snitches.
Now, I am deliberately not going to tell you the full cat story because honestly, I don't need to. What matters is Brendan's response to it. Because when faced with what the show itself calls an insane cat situation, something that is, from the description and fan reaction, either sad or alarming or both, Brendan Schaub's instinct is to say two things. 1, good dad doesn't mess with cats. 2, my first question was, how thick is that cat?
It is weird, right?
Good dad.
Also,
Doesn't cat.
my first question was, how thick is that cat?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's a chubby cat.
Yeah.
Wow, that's terrible.
Right?
That's it. That's the contribution. That's the analysis. Now, to be clear, Brendan didn't actually say the cat thickness line. That came from the guy sitting next to him. But we're spending time on it anyway because that's exactly the point. You become who you surround yourself with. That line didn't come from Brendan, but it came from his show, his co-host, his table. He built that room. He curates that energy. And when he heard it, his immediate response was, that's what I'm saying. He co-signed it. He claimed it. He adopted it like it was his own child, which, given the parenting take, tracks. Tragedy or weirdness or whatever the cat situation was, enters the room, gets processed, and the collective brain of that podcast emerges the other side with a thickness assessment and a parenting take. And Brendan's sitting there nodding like, yes, this is the correct analysis. And I want to be clear, I'm not outraged by this. I'm not even surprised by it. I'm just pointing it out because it is, in miniature, a perfect portrait of how that show operates. Everything becomes a thick joke. Everything becomes a half-formed punchline about what a real man does or doesn't do. Nobody can help it. It's load-bearing to the whole vibe of that room. Part 1. The guy who turned whiskey into a punchline, the truck giveaway into a merch funnel, and Austin into a sad sequel nobody ordered. Part 2. The guy who hears an insane cat situation, doesn't ask how thick is that cat, but absolutely wishes he had. Here's something that should not be possible, but is. There is a YouTube series called Into the Bapa-Verse. It has been running since at least 2023. It has multiple seasons worth of episodes. It catalogs with timestamps and receipts the lies, grifts, cancellations, and contradictions of Brendan Schaub's media presence. Episode 8 is titled Brendan Schaub Cancels European Tour and Reddit Exposes TFATK Channel. It covers two things. 1, a cancelled UK tour where Schaub cited vague reasons, and Reddit immediately began pulling the receipts on what actually happened. 2. Something considerably more interesting. Evidence that the TFA TK Clip Channel, the official YouTube clip account for the show, was quietly scraping jokes and observations from r/the fighter and the kid and presenting them as original content. The paraphrase that made the rounds in the discourse. He admits the content comes directly from Reddit posts. He takes the funny things his own critics and fans say, and he puts them in his videos. So if you thought this guy was naturally funny, now pause and let that land for a second. In part 1, we established that everyone who leaves Brendan Schaub's orbit gets a career upgrade. Theo Vaughn, Chappelle Lacey, Mark Harley, they all stepped away, and the universe rewarded them. But part 2 adds a layer to this, because it's not just that his collaborators level up when they escape. His haters, the people on the Fighter and the Kid subreddit archiving his contradictions, writing the jokes he can't, fact-checking his stories in real time, they've apparently become his writers. Think about what that means. The Bapa-Verse subreddit is doing 2 things simultaneously. It's fact-checking his claims, and it's writing funnier material than he can produce. The critics became the creative department. And then there's the larger Reddit ecosystem, which has at this point become something genuinely remarkable as a cultural object. r/the fighter and the kid has threads cataloging his claims about his NFL career. Threads cross-referencing his bench press numbers with his documented combine results. Threads archiving the European tour cancellation. Threads documenting the George firing with timeline-by-timeline breakdown. Threads running side-by-side comparisons of what he said on air versus what the text showed. It's not hate, or well, some of it appears to be, but a lot of it is something closer to community forensic accounting, a volunteer archive of a man who keeps making claims that don't survive scrutiny, maintained by people who clearly know more about his career than his own team does. At this point, the Bapa-Verse is a full ecosystem. And in that ecosystem, Brendan is the protagonist only on his own shows. Everywhere else, Reddit, the Into the Bapa-Verse series, the commentary channels, the Sherdog threads, he's the community-written NPC, a character whose behavior is so predictable that his own fans have built a genre around documenting it. And here's the kicker. In November 2025, they did an episode of TFATK, literally titled, "We Finally Address the Reddit Hate." After years, after hundreds of threads, after the bench press forensics and the George timeline and the European tour receipts and the Mark Harley texts. We finally address it. The episode doesn't refute anything specific. It doesn't produce counter-evidence. It's mostly Brendan suggesting that the hate comes from people who don't understand him, and that these people are probably not doing as well as he is, and that he doesn't really think about it that much, which is why they made a full episode titled, "We Finally Address the Reddit Hate." It's the most Brendan Schaub response to criticism possible. Make a big deal of addressing it, then don't address it, then feel hurt that people are still talking about it. So here's what part 2 adds to the picture. Part 1 was about the missteps you could see from a distance, the specials, the brands, the Austin storage unit. Part 2 is about the pattern underneath all of that, the pattern that predates Rogan, predates the UFC, predates the podcast. A guy who grew up with real advantages, a supportive family, a father who was already a martial artist, enough financial runway to pursue football and lacrosse and MMA and comedy and whiskey without ever needing a backup plan, who then spent his entire public life branding himself as someone who clawed it all out of nothing. A guy who had a genuinely impressive athletic career and still couldn't resist adding 20 imaginary bench press reps on top of it, because real was never quite enough. A guy who, on his own podcast, told a bullying story like it was a victory lap, and then couldn't understand why the audience heard something different. A guy who, faced with an insane cat situation, wanted to know the cat's thickness. And a guy whose haters, the subreddit, the archive channels, the forensic accountants of the Bapa-Verse, have become allegedly his actual writers, while he makes a full episode about finally addressing the hate, without addressing the hate. Brendan Schaub isn't just the final boss of Cringe because he fails in public. He's the final boss of Cringe because everywhere you look in the Bapa-Verse, from high school lacrosse to thick cats to 225 for 42, you find the same guy, desperately trying to be more impressive than he actually is and making it just a little bit easier for everyone around him to walk away and level up. That's the lore. That's the pattern. And that's why it keeps generating content. If you've been down the rabbit hole and there's a piece of deep Bapa-Verse lore we didn't cover, a story, a clip, a forum thread, a how thick is that moment, drop it in the comments. This is a community project at this point. And if you want part 3, the Schaub Expanded Universe, Reddit, Rogan, and beyond, let us know below. Like the video if you made it to the end. Subscribe if you want what comes next.